Jonathan Doe was a man of routine. Every morning began with a strong cup of coffee from the same little corner cafe, a short walk to the office, and a mandatory news check on his smartphone before the workday started. His life could be described as stable, perhaps even too stable. At 55, he had weathered his share of challenges, but they only strengthened his love for order and tranquility. Working as a lawyer at one of Chicago's top law firms, Jonathan had long since found his niche. He was valued for his reliability, responsibility, and meticulous approach to his work. But that day, something went wrong. Waking up a little later than usual, he felt an uneasy stir, as though some subtle shift in fate was signaling a change. Jonathan hurried to the office, weaving through people in the building's corridors, when he suddenly collided with a woman who was rushing toward him with the same urgency. "Oops!" she exclaimed as their bodies collided. The papers she was holding flew into the air in slow motion, scattering across the hallway. "Sorry, I didn't see you," Jonathan quickly said, kneeling to help gather the papers. He noticed how her face flushed with a light pink of embarrassment, but her eyes, bright, deep, shone with genuine gratitude. It was then that he really looked at her. A sharp business suit, slightly tousled blonde hair, and confident yet gentle movements. "It's fine, thank you," the woman said with a smile as she deftly gathered the papers. "My fault, I was in a rush. I'm Sarah Miller." Jonathan extended his hand, helping her up. Her handshake was firm yet warm. "Jonathan Doe," he introduced himself. "Welcome to our chaotic office. Looks like you're new here." Sarah nodded, glancing at the papers in her hands. "Yeah, I just transferred here. Already had to deal with deadlines and colleagues. Hope that's a good sign." Jonathan smiled. Her lightness and sense of humor caught his attention. She didn't seem bothered by the awkward collision. On the contrary, her confidence and calmness were almost contagious. For a moment, their eyes met, and something about the moment made him pause. An inexplicable feeling, like fate, had nudged him forward. Jonathan wasn't one to be distracted by new acquaintances. Work had always been his priority, but Sarah's image stubbornly lingered in his mind. He found himself mentally replaying their brief conversation, her genuine smile, and that strange feeling when their eyes met. Meanwhile, Sarah quickly earned a reputation as someone who could handle any task. Her ambition and energy didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues respected her professionalism, and her superiors admired her initiative. She was a woman of action. But despite that, there was an unusual warmth in her demeanor. Jonathan was amazed at how this woman, always on the move, could maintain such charm and natural ease. A few days after their first meeting, surprisingly, Jonathan and Sarah's paths crossed again. This time, he noticed her in the hallway, absorbed in reading some documents. She was balancing a massive stack of papers, clearly on the verge of dropping it. Without hesitation, Jonathan stepped forward. "Let me help," he offered, swiftly catching the part of the stack that was about to fall. Sarah looked up and smiled again, the same smile that had made him forget why he was even there. "Thanks, Jonathan. Seems like I'm always making a mess." "Don't worry, it's part of office life. Chaos is our second name," he joked as he walked with her to her office. On the way, they started talking. First about work, then about life. Jonathan learned that Sarah had worked in another office of the company for a long time, but had transferred here looking for new challenges. Her career had always been her top priority, but she also mentioned that she dreamed of something more than just a successful job. "What about you, Jonathan?" she asked as they reached her office. "You seem like someone who's found their place in life." He paused for a moment. Yes, his life was calm and stable, but in that moment he felt a strange sense of dissatisfaction, as if something important was missing. He wasn't sure how to answer. "Maybe," he said, "though sometimes I think stability is only part of the equation. Sometimes you want to add, well, a little chaos." Sarah laughed, and her laughter was unexpectedly light and genuine. "Then you're in the right place. Life in this office is pure chaos." That conversation left Jonathan deep in thought. His day was filled with an unfamiliar warmth, and the evening turned out to be surprisingly pleasant. For the first time in a long while, he caught himself thinking about the next morning, hoping to see Sarah again. That night, Jonathan lay awake for hours. His mind was racing with thoughts of work, Sarah, and the strange feeling that had arisen when they met. Something in his carefully planned life had started to shift, and he wasn't sure whether to welcome it or fear it. But one thing he knew for sure: that encounter hadn't been just a coincidence. It had marked the beginning of something bigger, something that would change his life. A few days had passed since their first meeting, but Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Her confidence, ease, and that unique energy she seemed to infuse into everything around her had made a lasting impression. However, he hadn't expected their paths to cross so soon. That day, Jonathan was walking down the office corridor, lost in thought about an upcoming meeting. His mind was occupied with legal matters that required focus and careful preparation. But then something caught his eye: a familiar figure. It was Sarah. She was standing by a table, piled high with documents, clearly in a rush. Her movements were quick, but there was a subtle hint of exhaustion in her hurried rhythm. The papers in her hands began to wobble dangerously, and it was clear that they were moments away from falling to the floor. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He moved toward her quickly. "Let me grab that for you," he offered, extending his hand and deftly catching the top part of the stack that had begun to slip. Sarah startled, as if coming out of her thoughts, and looked up at him. "Oh, thanks, Jonathan. I didn't even notice you were there," she said with a relieved smile. "The secret is being in the right place at the right time," he joked. "Or just noticing colleagues who desperately need help." Sarah laughed. It was a genuine, melodic laugh that immediately lightened the mood. Together, they carried the papers to her office. After setting them down on her desk, Jonathan stayed for a moment to help her organize the documents. As they worked, they struck up a conversation. "How's it been working here?" Jonathan asked while stacking the folders neatly. "Intense, but interesting. I like that there's always something going on," Sarah replied. "Though sometimes it feels like there's way too much happening in one day." Jonathan smiled, understanding her feelings. Early in his career, he'd felt the same way, like the world was moving too fast, and he could barely keep up. "Yeah, our office is a constant marathon. The key is finding balance, and not being afraid to ask for help when you need it," he said. Sarah nodded, glancing at him with gratitude. They kept talking, starting with work and eventually moving into more personal territory. Sarah shared how she had moved to Chicago for this job, leaving behind a comfortable, but too predictable life in a small town. "I needed a change," she admitted. "I felt stuck. This job is my chance to start fresh, to prove to myself I can do more." Jonathan listened with genuine interest. He could tell there was more beneath the surface than she was letting on. She spoke of her ambitions with such sincerity that it made him reflect on his own path. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "You seem like someone who's already found their place in life." Jonathan smiled slightly, considering her words. He'd always thought of his life as being in order, but now, for some reason, he felt a small seed of doubt. "Maybe," he replied. "But sometimes I feel like stability is just one side of the coin. Sometimes you want a little, how should I put it, impulsiveness. Or something new." Sarah smiled. "I think you're in the right place. Working here is one big impulse." They both laughed, and there was a lightness in their laughter, as if they had known each other for much longer. Jonathan felt something special forming between them. It wasn't just a pleasant conversation, it was understanding. That evening, things were hectic at the office. Chaos had descended when one of their major clients suddenly demanded a complete overhaul of a big contract, and the team scrambled to fix the issues. Jonathan, as usual, stayed calm amid the panic, methodically solving problems. But he noticed how Sarah threw herself into the work. Her energy and determination were impressive. By the time the clock hit nearly 10 p.m., Sarah looked tired but satisfied. The contract was ready, and everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. As Jonathan passed her desk, he stopped. "Good work today," he said. "It wasn't easy, but you handled it." Sarah looked up, a slight smile crossing her face. "Thanks," she said. "But without your help this morning, it could have been a lot worse." Jonathan shrugged. "Sometimes a little help at the right moment can change a lot," he remarked. Those words seemed to strike a chord with her. They exchanged another smile, and Jonathan felt like this day had been an important step for both of them. He didn't know where this new connection would lead, but he was sure it would change a lot in his life. A few months had passed since Jonathan and Sarah first met. In that time, she had managed to establish herself in the new office and prove her professional skills. Her career began to skyrocket, as if someone had turned on a hidden engine, propelling her ambition and drive to an incredible speed. Colleagues admired her persistence, and management increasingly trusted her with important projects. But the path hadn't been easy. Sarah worked to the limit, sometimes spending entire days and nights at the office. Jonathan watched her progress with interest. He saw that she had that rare talent that not only allowed her to achieve her goals, but also inspired those around her. However, he also noticed how hard it was for her. Fatigue sometimes showed in her eyes, and tension crept into her voice. He felt like she was taking on too much, and he decided to help her find a balance. One day at lunch in the office cafeteria, Jonathan brought up a conversation they both would never forget. "Sarah, you're amazing, your work, and I can't help but be impressed, but be honest with me, are you getting any rest?" he asked, looking at her intently. Sarah smiled faintly, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "To be honest, there's hardly any time for rest, but I have to. I have no choice. I moved here to make something of myself, and I can't afford to relax," she replied. Jonathan nodded, understanding her position. "I get it. But still, sometimes it's important to take a pause. Even the strongest of us need a break. If you burn out, you won't be able to work or enjoy your successes," he said. His words made Sarah pause. She knew he was right, but the habit of always being at her best and striving for perfection made it hard to let go. Jonathan sensed that this conversation wouldn't end just with words, and he decided to support her in another way. After that day, Jonathan paid closer attention to how Sarah was handling her work. He offered advice, shared his experience, and sometimes simply showed up at the right moment to help. If she ran into a tough problem, he was always ready to offer a fresh perspective or suggest a better course of action. Sarah appreciated his support and often said that without him, it would have been much harder. A strong friendship began to form between them. They started spending more time together, not just at work, but outside of it as well. Sometimes they'd have lunch at a small cafe nearby, where they could freely talk not just about work, but also about personal things. Sarah shared her dreams about how she hoped to one day start her own business and be independent. Jonathan told stories from his past about how he built his career, the mistakes he made, and the lessons he learned from them. One evening, as they were walking through the park after work, Sarah unexpectedly asked, "Jonathan, have you ever felt like you could have done something more? Like there's another path you could have taken?" The question caught him off guard. He paused, thinking about his life. Yes, he had achieved a lot, but sometimes he felt like he had missed out on something important. Maybe it was dreams he let go of when he was younger, or people he had lost along the way. Sometimes I think about it," he replied. "But I guess what matters isn't what we could have done, it's what we're doing now. And sometimes the people around us help us understand what our true purpose is." Sarah smiled when she heard his words. It seemed to her that Jonathan saw something more in her than just a colleague. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to notice something in him too, something that made their connection special. Despite everything, Jonathan and Sarah's friendship wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments when work disagreements turned into heated discussions. One day, while working on an important project, they disagreed on how to present an idea to the client. Sarah was adamant about taking a bold, modern approach, while Jonathan thought it was better to stick to tried-and-true methods. "You're too cautious," Sarah said, frustration clear in her voice. "If we want to stand out, we need to take risks." "And you're rushing too much," Jonathan replied calmly. "Sometimes taking a risk isn't the best decision, especially when the company's reputation is on the line." Their argument went on into the late evening, but in the end, they reached a compromise. That moment became a lesson for both of them. Despite having different viewpoints, they could still work as a team, finding the balance between caution and boldness. Sarah continued to grow as a professional, and Jonathan was proud of her success. But even more, he was proud of the fact that he had become her pillar of support. Their friendship deepened with each passing day, and although neither of them wanted to think about what might lie beyond that, deep down, they both knew. This was something more than just work colleagues. Every conversation, every problem they solved together made their bond stronger. Jonathan felt his life had changed since Sarah came into it, and Sarah found in him what she had been missing: reliability, experience, and genuine care. This was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter where friendship became the foundation for something deeper, though neither of them was ready to admit it, even to themselves. With each passing day, Jonathan became more and more aware that his feelings for Sarah had long since moved beyond mere friendship. In her ambition, her drive to move forward, and the way she blended strength and confidence with genuine warmth, he found what he had been searching for. She wasn't just a colleague and friend to him. She had become something much more significant. With every glance, every conversation, he realized more and more that there was something deeper between them than just respect and mutual affection. Sarah, on the other hand, began to notice how her view of Jonathan had changed. He wasn't just a mentor and friend who helped her in her career, but someone who had become a pillar for her in difficult moments. He was always there, offering support and listening when she needed it. He knew her fears and doubts, and he always knew exactly what to say when she needed it most. It wasn't just friendship. It was a bond that was becoming deeper with each passing day. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to admit her feelings. She didn't know how Jonathan would take it, and she worried that such a confession might destroy their trust and their relationship. One evening, after successfully closing an important deal at work, they found themselves together once again. The work had been tough for both of them, but completing the deal brought a sense of relief and joy. Sarah felt that her success had been made possible in large part by Jonathan's wise advice and support. She couldn't help but notice the genuine admiration in his eyes when he spoke about her achievements. It wasn't just professional admiration. There was something more in his gaze, something that hinted at something deeper. They walked through the park, enjoying the cool evening air and the quiet that felt especially comforting after a long workday. Sarah walked beside him, her steps light on the ground, and it seemed like she had finally found the harmony she had been searching for. But in her heart, there was no peace. The thought that something important remained unsaid wouldn't let her relax. Jonathan noticed this, and despite his usual calm demeanor, he felt that he had to make a move. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something," he said, almost in a whisper, as if the words he was about to say might break the fragile silence of the park. Sarah stopped, her heart suddenly racing. All this time, she had been trying to hide her feelings, but now, when Jonathan said those words, her fears were heightened. She wasn't ready, even though everything inside her was screaming that this moment should have come a long time ago. "You can tell me anything, Jonathan," she replied with a light smile, but there was a noticeable uncertainty in her voice. In her eyes was an expectation, almost a growing anxiety, that deepened with each passing second. Jonathan stood silent for a long moment. He felt a wave of emotions building inside him, and it was hard to find the right words. He was someone who was used to analyzing and controlling his feelings, but now he couldn't hold back the words that he felt needed to be said. He took a step closer to her, his voice more intense than usual. "Sarah, over these months, I've come to realize that I feel something more than just friendship. You're not just a colleague, and you're not just a good friend to me. I know this might come as a surprise, but I can't keep it in anymore. I want to be with you, if you want that too." Sarah stood before him, her eyes wide in surprise. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She felt her heart pounding and her breath quicken. In that moment, time seemed to stand still, and all she could do was look into his eyes and try to grasp what she had just heard. The silence between them hung heavy, but Jonathan couldn't look away. He was prepared for anything, for silence, for rejection, for the kind of surprise that might be painful. He waited for her response, but in his heart, a fear had already settled, that perhaps they wouldn't be able to take this next step. Finally, Sarah stepped forward, her face serious, but despite everything, there was a warm spark in her eyes. She took his hand, as if signaling that Jonathan's words hadn't hurt her, but had rather touched her deeply. "I feel something more too," she said softly. "We've both changed over these months, and I've noticed it. I like what we have. I like how you're there for me, how you support me, and I want that to continue." It was as though everything they had been through up until that point only made sense now. In that moment, when Sarah spoke those words, Jonathan felt his heart fill with warmth and relief. He knew this wasn't just a confession, it was the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. It was a step into the unknown, but it was a step taken with the confidence that they could overcome any obstacles that might come their way. Their story was just beginning. But in that moment, they both knew that this step wasn't random. It was something more than just an admission of feelings. It was the moment they truly found each other. Sarah's career success was unstoppable. With each passing day, she became more and more confident in herself and her abilities. After getting a promotion, she not only proved she deserved it, but also etched her name into the company's history. People started noticing her, respecting her hard work and ambitions. It was the result of years of dedication and sacrifice, and she knew this victory was just the first step on the path to even greater success. Jonathan was by her side, always supporting her when she had doubts, encouraging her during moments of uncertainty. He didn't just help her reach career heights, he was the person who shared in her worries and joys. He saw how Sarah grew professionally, and his pride in her was immeasurable. He supported her in everything she did, and in return, she valued every moment spent with him. Their relationship grew deeper and more intimate. They spent more and more time together, not just at work, but also outside of it. They walked together often, discussing not only work, but also their dreams and future goals. There was something special in their conversations, something more than just friendship or love. It was genuine support for each other in the toughest times, and at the same time, an honest joy for each other's successes. But Jonathan began to feel that his feelings for Sarah had become more serious than just friendship. He wanted to be with her forever. One evening, after a party celebrating Sarah's promotion, Jonathan felt that the moment had finally come to take an important step. He couldn't shake the thought that Sarah was not only his best friend, but also the person he wanted to share his life with. After everyone had congratulated her and Sarah was a bit worn out from all the attention, Jonathan suggested they step outside, away from the noisy crowd. A walk in the quiet park seemed like the perfect setting to express what had long been on his heart. The park was bathed in the soft light of street lamps, and the evening air was fresh and cool. Everything around them felt so peaceful and cozy that, for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jonathan's attention was entirely focused on Sarah, her light steps, her smile that hadn't faded even after a long day filled with responsibilities and duties. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," he started, his voice serious but tinged with nervousness. She turned to him, raising her eyebrows slightly, almost as if sensing the importance of the moment. "Did something happen?" she asked, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity. Jonathan, deep down, was ready for any reaction, but the thought that this moment could change their lives made his heart beat faster. He stopped, studying her face as if trying to memorize every detail before taking this decisive step. "No, nothing happened," he said, smiling. "But I have to confess something. Over these months we've spent together, I've realized you're not just my best friend. You're the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I'm so proud of you, proud of how you achieve everything you set your mind to, and I want to be by your side. I want you to be my wife." Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected this confession, though deep down she had sensed something special between them. She felt her heart fill not just with excitement, but with joy. A moment of doubt shifted into understanding. Jonathan, who had always been there for her, supporting her, was the one she wanted to share her life with. "Are you serious?" she asked softly, unable to hide her emotions. There was a light in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. "Yes," he answered, not looking away. "I can't imagine my life without you, Sarah. You're not just a part of my life, you are its meaning." Sarah smiled, though her heart was still racing. This was what she had wanted, but also what she hadn't expected to hear so soon. Her life in recent years had been focused on her career, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for this big step. But something in Jonathan's words and his warm gaze made her feel that it was the right decision. "I agree," she said, her voice full of tenderness. "But Jonathan, I'd like us to wait a little longer before the wedding. It's important to me to finish my studies first. I want to make sure I can do it right, without any distractions. It's really important to me." He couldn't hide the slight shadow of disappointment in his eyes, but he understood her words. He knew that her ambitions and desire for success were an integral part of who she was. He had always admired her determination and understood that she wouldn't be happy if she didn't complete what she had started. "I understand, Sarah," he replied softly. "What matters to me is that you're happy. We'll be together, and I'll wait as long as it takes. You're more important than anything else." Their conversation continued in a warm, sincere tone, despite the gravity and seriousness of the subject. In that moment, Jonathan realized he was ready to support her in everything. He knew that challenges and doubts might come along the way, but if they stayed by each other's side, there would be no obstacle they couldn't overcome. The few words spoken in private began to change their relationship, giving it a new depth. This wasn't just a step toward marriage. It was a step toward deeper understanding, a closer connection, one that he hoped would continue to grow and strengthen in the future. Life for Jonathan and Sarah seemed perfect after they confessed their feelings for each other and began to build their future together. But, as often happens, external circumstances started testing their love. After Jonathan suggested that Sarah move into his mother's apartment before their wedding, his life began to change. He hoped that this temporary arrangement would allow them to save money for their own place while starting their life together. However, as it turned out, this was just the beginning of a series of difficulties. His mother, Lucille, couldn't accept his decision. Every day she became more and more displeased with his choice. She believed that Sarah, with her career ambitions, independence, and drive, couldn't be the right wife for Jonathan. Lucille was an old-fashioned woman who believed a woman's place was at home, not in high-powered careers. Her discontent became more apparent each day, and it began to poison the atmosphere in the house. Sarah felt the pressure not only from Lucille but also from her daughter, Jonathan's sister, who supported their mother. Every conversation, every look, every offhand remark felt like an attack on her choices, her ambitions, and the fact that she wasn't good enough for their family. Lucille was harsh, at times outright offensive, and despite Sarah's best efforts to remain polite and patient, her tolerance began to wear thin. Living in Lucille's house became increasingly unbearable. The constant reproaches, the insinuations that her place was not among successful business people, but at home taking care of domestic chores, hurt her more than she was willing to admit. Sarah tried to remain silent, tried not to let her emotions show, but every day, things got worse. Every glance from Lucille felt like a needle to her heart. Every word was like a knife in her back. One day, when Jonathan was at work, another incident occurred. Lucille and her daughter caused a storm, insulting Sarah in her absence. Lucille couldn't hold back her frustration and started voicing her opinion loudly, claiming that Jonathan deserved better than a career woman who would never care for the home. Sarah was already on the edge, but she held it together. However, when Lucille began to degrade her over her life choices, her patience snapped. What happened next was a real turning point for her. When Jonathan came home earlier than usual and saw how his mother was belittling Sarah, his face went pale. He was shocked, but at first he tried to calm the situation, stepping into the conflict. However, his words and attempts to diffuse the tension didn't help. Instead, Lucille turned on him, accusing him of becoming weak, unable to make the right decision. Sarah stood off to the side, but her heart was breaking. She couldn't hide her feelings any longer. She couldn't keep living in this house, feeling alienated and humiliated. Jonathan understood this. He couldn't let his mother continue to degrade the woman he loved. He walked up to Sarah, gently took her hand and said, "Let's go. We're leaving." The moment they stepped out the door, Jonathan made a decision that would change their lives. He gathered Sarah's things without saying a word to his mother. He knew that if he didn't make this move, his relationship with Sarah would be destroyed. "I bought us an apartment," he said once they were safely away. "We're living together now, and we don't need this hell anymore." It was a defining moment, one he described as an act of love and protection. They left Lucille's house, and despite the doubts and fears both of them had, they felt a sense of relief. A few days passed, and life started to settle down. Jonathan and Sarah tried to forget the tension and resentment of the past, but soon Lucille came to Jonathan's office. She stormed into his office, full of rage and accusations. "You can't do this. You don't understand what you're losing. You're my son," she shouted, trying to bring him back to the house. Jonathan listened to her words, but there was a determination in his eyes that couldn't be shaken. He said firmly, "No, Mom. Sarah and I are married, and now we're building our life. I'm not coming back. We're not going back to a place where we're not accepted." His voice was calm, but every word was filled with inner strength. He knew this step was important, not just for him and Sarah, but for his future, for their future. Lucille was stunned. She couldn't believe that her son, whom she had raised, was ready to leave her for a woman she couldn't connect with. But for Jonathan, the decision was clear. He knew that love requires self-sacrifice, patience, and the strength to face challenges together. In that moment, he felt he had made the right choice. Over time, as a new chapter began in their lives, Jonathan and Sarah grew stronger than ever. Together, they overcame hardships, each day bringing them closer and more resilient. Their love was tested, but they kept moving forward. Sarah, being with Jonathan, felt that with him, she could face any challenge. And Jonathan, seeing her ambition and strength, knew he had chosen the right woman. The struggles they had faced only strengthened their relationship. It wasn't just a test for their love. It was a process of solidifying their shared values, their journey together. They realized that true love isn't always an easy road, but it's a road worth traveling. And in the end, they understood that all they needed was to be there for each other, to support and love each other, no matter what. Their story wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was a story of how love, if it's real, can stand strong against everything.